What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 105 on this Thursday, August 22nd, 2024. 8 days from the opener, a week from tomorrow. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Thursday. Oklahoma got a pretty big recruit commit yesterday. You may have heard about it. We'll talk about it, the ramifications. What's next in that 2025 class as it starts to wind down the high school season, about to start the senior season for those guys. And Collin and I have some roster superlatives we're going to get into today as well. Most approved, team MVP, impact freshman, stuff like that. We got some fun picks, and we'll go through the roster a little bit on the program as well. Disclaimer, if you can hear any lawn equipment, apologies in advance. Got some guys working on my yard right outside this window here, so we'll try and avoid that. I'll mute myself when I'm not talking. We'll let Collin do the heavy lifting. And also some programming note as well. Looking ahead to next week, which will be our first game week. Very excited for that. The Brent Venables press conference, which is going to be on Tuesdays again this season, is going to be on Monday next week because of the condensed week. So watch out for that on Monday on the YouTube channel. And then we'll have player interviews that night. And then James, Tom, myself will do our full season preview, final predictions. That'll be on Tuesday. So that's looking ahead to next week a little bit. So without further ado, Collin, Michael Fasusi committed to Oklahoma yesterday. We were waiting for it. Here it is. It finally happened. You were there. Break it all down for us, man. Massive get, obviously, for Oklahoma.
This is, in my opinion, the guy that Oklahoma wanted in the 2025 recruiting cycle. This was priority number one. I don't think there was a 1B or a 1C. When you look at this cycle, I think it goes back to really when we launched this site. And roughly 2 years ago, I returned to Louisville, Texas, and drove right down the street. I believe I had been back on the Oklahoma beat for about 5 days, and went over to see Michael Fasusi. And when I pulled up, that guy was wearing an Oklahoma glove. And talking to Jaden Hardy, some of those guys at the time who were teammates with Michael Fasusi, it was very clear that Oklahoma was the primary player for him that early on in his recruitment. And talking to Mike after practice, he made it very apparent Bill Beanbo was the coach in college football that was after him the heaviest across the country. And I think at that time, there were a lot of other schools who, whether or not they realized it at the time, they were going to have to play catch up. Now, this one had a lot of ebbs and flows. I'm sure we'll dive into that. But as we sit here and Oklahoma has crossed the finish line, it became a little bit more of a neck-and-neck race. Certainly saw some changes, but almost in a theatric finish, Oklahoma gets its 5-star offensive tackle and a guy they really, really wanted out of this year.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate. I mean, the guy is the highest rated recruit in the class now. We've been talking about we joked about it last week. We talked about Michael Fasusi for over a year and trying to articulate the impact that this kind of guy can have on your team. And what a win for Bill Beatonbow, who has had, I'm sure for him a frustrating offseason where we talked about the offensive line. It feels like every show since the end of last season because of all the turnover and everything. But when you look at this class with Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foji, who's very well thought of, and then Darius Afalava, Owen Hollenbeck to go with the freshman crop he just brought in, Eddie Pierre-Louis, Eugene Brooks, Daniel Akinkumi, Isaiah Autry, Josh Isosa, and then you loop in the class before that, those rising guys with Jake Sexton, Jake Taylor, Logan Howland. I talked about it last week, but it feels like we are very close to Oklahoma getting back to that 2017, 2018 Joe Moore Award level offensive lines play. I mean, very, very soon. Bill Beanbo is stacking this thing up. This is recruiting class several in a row now, and it's hard to overstate the get. Certainly bringing in a guy like Michael Fasusi that could have went basically anywhere. And it's hard. Like I said, it's you really can't be hyperbolic enough for how big of an addition it is. From your perspective, the job that Bill Beatonbow just did in this offensive line group now that he's put together, it feels like one of the best. I'm hesitant. I mean, I'm scared to say, but is it the best maybe offensive line group that Bill Beatonbow has recruited at Oklahoma? I mean, it's really, really strong.
I mean, if it's not the best, it's top 2 or 3.
There, yeah.
I don't think there's much of an argument. Now, here's what I want to say. I think we knew going in to this recruiting cycle specifically, and again, like we started covering this cycle when they were rising juniors. So before the start of their junior season, our site really kind of dove into the coverage of the 2025 class. And I think everyone kind of understood the quiet part of 2025, which was you've got to nail the offensive line haul, because coming off 2024, we know all the talk about line of scrimmage play. Oklahoma's moving to the SEC. Brent Venables, Todd Bates, Miguel Chavis, they do their thing in 2024. They get a number of guys that we may be getting ready to talk about here later in the show along that defensive line, whether in the portal or obviously on the recruiting trail. And so from 2024, where it was so defensive line centric, into 2025, this class was all about the offensive line. For Bill Bedenbaugh, in my opinion, I don't know how many times I've talked about this here on the show, but I think it's so relevant. When I came back, you would talk to Michael Fasusi, Ty Haywood, Lamont Rogers, so many of these elite offensive tackles, especially down here in the state of Texas. And at that time, when they were rising juniors, they would all say the same thing. Bill Bedenbaugh in Oklahoma, that's the program and the coach I'm hearing from the most. Bill Bedenbaugh did his thing. He was out in front of this. Obviously, recruiting a 5-star offensive tackle, it's really hard just to get one. But number one, for Bill Bedenbaugh to not only have Oklahoma in so many of these races, but then number two, close on the guy that I would argue they wanted the most out of that crop, it's an outstanding job. And the other part, too, that I kind of mentioned in some of the articles that I published, this wasn't just one of those where Bill Bedenbaugh got out in front and Oklahoma carried the lead the rest of the way. No,
yeah.
In fact, one thing we talked about when I went over to see Mike for his commitment announcement, like the Texas smoke was very, very real. Obviously, there were a number of predictions in that sort of favored him to land with the Longhorns. And I can tell you there for a few months, that kind of felt like a foregone conclusion. But Bill Bedenbaugh kept chipping away. Texas, I think, was very relevant. But the thing that we go back to so often with Bill is that relational aspect and the trust that he builds.
Yeah.
And so one thing Michael Fasusi talked about, Josh, afterwards was it was really that official visit in Norman for him that he felt like he wanted to seal the deal. In fact, he actually admitted he was very close to committing to Oklahoma on his OV in Norman, but he checked out Texas. And this is one of the primary points I want to make. As I mentioned in those stories, Bill Bedenbaugh got out in front. He dealt with some serious pushes from other big name programs in this region who have a lot of resources. And Josh, I'm here to tell you, contrary to popular belief and what you see on some of these social media takes, Texas and A&M really, really wanted this guy.
Sure.
Talked to some sources while I was at the announcement. Both of those schools were very heavily involved down the stretch in the few days or week leading up to this announcement. But I think it sends a message to your question about Bill Bedenbaugh that no matter how hard A&M or Texas or other programs tried to turn the tides late, Michael Fasusi stayed put, and he kept his mind on the idea that he wanted to play for Bill Bedenbaugh in Oklahoma. And so you got to give this guy a ton of credit, again, to get priority one in this cycle at a time where this class was going to be judged based on the offensive line haul that you were going to get. I mean, it's a home run. And I can't speak enough about the job that Bill Bedenbaugh did with a guy who I firmly believe he's going to be able to turn into his next big-time first-round pick.
Yeah, I agree completely. And, there's lots of, great content, certainly from Collin on the website, on Sooners Illustrated right now about Michael Fasusi and the impact of it. One thing, from our own Mike Roach, whenever he committed, that stuck out to me was a quote from Michael about Coach Bedenbaugh, and you could just, from the words, you could tell the, reverence, I guess, he has for Coach Beatonbow and what he's done, how many guys he's developed and put in the league. So this is a give your flowers moment. And it was Bill Beatonbow's birthday yesterday too.
Yeah.
So not a bad birthday gift, certainly I would say. And, like we talked about a bunch of times, these elite offensive tackles just don't grow on trees. They're not available in the portal, generally speaking,
No.
which we talked about before. To win at a high level, you have to find a way to get guys like this. And Oklahoma did it. And the recruiting in general continues to just kind of have that upward trajectory. It's a huge get.
Yeah. So I want to talk real quick, two things briefly that you brought up. Number one, the day. I just want to talk about Michael the person. That announcement, folks, it was really cool being there. For those who don't know, August 21st, and I wrote a story about this, it was not only going to be his decision day. He kind of knew that's around the time he wanted to make the call. But part of that being he wanted to make his college commitment on the day. August 21st, 2024 was 5 years to the date that Michael and the Fasusi family moved from Nigeria to America and took that leap of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just incredible. Like in the story, he talked about how he moved to the States with his family. He had no idea that American football was even a thing. He just Googled American football and searched football game and watched it and was like, yeah, I want to play this.
I could probably do that. Yeah.
And 5 years later, he's a 5-star. And so number one, he gets to celebrate his family and honor his family and what they did in moving to America and having that massive life change. It was very cool to see him sort of tip his cap to his parents. Bill Beatonbow's birthday, it all just it lined up perfectly.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really cool that Michael Fasusi was like, yeah, I kind of knew all of this was going to align. And I felt like it wasn't coincidence. It was fate for me to make this call with Bill Beatonbow's birthday and my family's anniversary of my move to America and everything. That was awesome. But then, like you mentioned too, the caliber of player and relative to a need, this is an elite player in person at a premium position at a time where Oklahoma's transitioned into the SEC. I wrote in one of my stories, this is your franchise left tackle, folks. This is the guy that's manning the blind side for you in the Southeastern Conference. And when we talk about the player, this guy's got just under an 84-inch wingspan. The guy tests combine and athletically out the wazoo, multiple 50 feet plus throws in shot put. And he has, Josh, he has no idea what he's doing yet on the football field. He is not even close to his ceiling as a football player. And that's just because of how new he is to this sport. But I wrote about it in the analysis piece. You're talking about a guy who we have ranked as a 5-star because he checks every box athletically. I believe his just under 32-inch vertical jump was the most by a 290 plus pounder, or second most over the last several years. This guy breaks records basically at his size. We're also talking about a player who's going to get to Oklahoma and not only be your quote unquote franchise left tackle, but the marriage with Bill Beatonbow, this partnership, this guy's going to literally learn about the game of football from the best offensive line coach in the country. And if you sit down and think about that, that only furthers what this guy could become and what he's going to look like in an Oklahoma uniform. It's very exciting. OU has every reason to be thrilled with this addition. And I think that goes into this equation as well as this is obviously a big get, but we haven't even seen remotely close to the best version of Michael Fasusi. And that version is probably going to be realized under Bill Beatonbow and Norman.
Great get, perfect fit. I'm sure we can probably bank on his roommate, Sean Hutton, probably very excited, future roommate.
Sean was sweating, dude. He came up to me. He was like, "What are you hearing? What are you thinking?" He was actually, for those who don't know, Sean Hutton, the preferred walk-on offensive line commit for Oklahoma. He was the one holding the phone for Michael Fasusi's Instagram Live.
Doing some horns downs. I was watching.
He was like, "I'm so nervous. I'm going to drop the phone, no matter what Mike says." So he got through it too. It was a nerve-wracking day, I'm sure, for everybody. But Sean Hutton tip of the cap to him too, man. He helped out in this recruitment a ton, and I know he's very excited about having Mike come with him to OU.
100%. So obviously, ginormous get. As you wrote yesterday on Sooners Illustrated, he's the 23rd commit. He moves Oklahoma to the top 8 right now in our 24/7 Sports class rankings. So I guess the next obvious question, natural question, is what's next / left in 2025? Like we said, senior season for these guys is getting ready to start. A lot of these dudes, I'm sure this played in a part for Michael as well, like to have this done before their senior season starts. But there's a couple names still hanging out there. What's left for Oklahoma fans to pay attention to before signing day in December for this 25 class for Oklahoma, which, again, already has 23 guys in, but there's still a couple spots left to play with if they wanted.
Yeah, first things first, you got to hold on to this guy.
Sure.
Right? You just get a 5-star, and I don't know if those other contenders are going away, but I think that's priority one is now that you have the 5-star kid, the perfect fit for you on and off in the field, you better make sure that you get that pen to paper come December. But I do want to lead off this discussion, Josh, with kind of that real quick. Obviously, what's next is you try and hold on to your 5-star guy. I personally believe Michael Fasusi is going to be pretty much locked in the rest of the way. So if we take that concept relatively out of the way, there's a few different ways you can go here. I want to start with Christian Jones, the 4-star linebacker out of the state of Nebraska. We kind of know that this one is essentially down to OU and the in-state Huskers. I'm supposed to be, hopefully, talking to Christian. We've swapped a couple texts back and forth this week, but I think we're going to try and get an interview scheduled so that, again, I hope will be up on SoonersIllustrated.com for our subscribers. But I personally feel that's the guy right now that Oklahoma is going to go after the hardest the remainder of the way. We know this is a linebacker-centric staff. Brent Venables, Zach Alley, Skalski, so many other members of this staff. They're linebacker guys, and Christian Jones is kind of that remaining outlier, if you will. So I'm very interested to see what happens there. I think Christian Jones right now kind of tracking for a decision, if not in the fall to winter, it could be as early as within the month. So we'll see. A lot of variables there. Next thing, our own Blair Angulo, who does a great job, he kind of dropped a report that I think shocked a lot of people on the Oklahoma beat, but it is very relevant. So we talk so much about the offensive line, right? Blair reported, I believe first in the industry too, to report that Austin Peay, the offensive tackle, offensive guard out in the state of Utah, he is still very much in talks with OU and Bill Bedenbaugh and is actually potentially looking at getting to OU in the fall for a visit. I can't remember if he said it's an official visit or not. I'll have to go back and look at Blair's story, and I would encourage fans to do so as well. Yeah. But Austin Peay and OU are still very much in talks. Now, I do want to add some context here, too, why I think this is important. I think a lot of people will go, well, Collin, what sense does that make? Shouldn't this O-line class in 2025 be done? To that, I would say, sure. I mean, you're running out of spots on paper. Yeah. But to my knowledge, Austin Peay might be going on a mission. So that takes him potentially out of the equation for whichever program were to land him for roughly 2 years. And so who knows if this guy is perceived as a potential 2027 take, right? How does Oklahoma handle that situation? Remains to be seen, but that's someone who could get on campus and all of a sudden become a priority target down the stretch for OU in 2025. And then the last thing I want to say, I think that, again, the offensive line stuff is such a hot button topic within this cycle. It's tricky because we're talking about, number one, a name in 5-star Andrew Babalola, who, depending on who you talk to, you get a differing level of read on Oklahoma's standing within that recruitment. I don't know that OU's done with that one. So we'll kind of see what takes place over the next few weeks. Obviously, there are a number of programs that at one point or another have felt very good about their positioning with Babalola and his family. So we'll see. I think Oklahoma is still kind of hovering around there with the 5-star. And if you somehow find a way to cover ground there, Josh, I mean, that's about as good as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Considering you would potentially be able to swing a Babalola edition with Fasusi and Ryan Fauché. The last thing I want to say, and this is just me, but a little nugget. I personally, and this is not reflective of anything I've heard at Oklahoma, it's just me covering the ground that I cover. If I were OU, if I were in that office, I'd be saying, hey, if we want another offensive lineman, why not give a quick call to Lamont Rogers? Now, there's a lot of layers to that, but basically, Michael Fasusi and Lamont Rogers really got to know each other over the course of this recruiting process. I know that Mike had told me a time or two that no matter where he was going to end up, one guy that he would really like to call and kind of see whether or not he'd be interested in joining him is Lamont. But then we also know that, and I've talked about this here on the show, so I'm not sharing any earth-shattering information. We also know that many expect a quote-unquote second recruitment for Lamont Rogers, if you will, during the fall. Does OU enter the mix? I think you add Fasusi, and if you still think Lamont Rogers could be the player that he has the ceiling to become, with Fasusi in your corner, man, I may be worth a phone call. So that's kind of how I see 2025 as it stands today. And the last thing I want to add, who knows if another name pops up, a late senior eval, right? Maybe one domino doesn't fall in Oklahoma's direction and they identify a player late that they really like. I don't necessarily think that's out of the equation either. So I think there's a lot still kind of left on the bone, even though a lot of it's unknown in 2025.
Cool. I mean, a lot of very, kind of interesting storylines, names to keep an eye on. And that 25 class as their senior seasons are just about to get going all across the country. So a few things to keep an eye on there. But Michael Fasusi, the saga, hopefully over. Like you said, you feel good about it. But until he signs, everybody will be, a little nervous, I guess. But massive get, obviously, for Oklahoma. All right, let's do some roster superlatives on the way out here. Got a few things, we're kind of looking ahead. They play a game a week from tomorrow, which is
crazy,
amazing. It just feels so good. Tom and I were kind of texting yesterday, kind of planning out the week. And, it's amazing how easy it is to fill up a week of content when there's a game. It's like, wow, this is so much better. This is so exciting. It's amazing to feel that we got a game coming up next week. So, we'll do a few superlatives here. We're going to go through the roster, some things, some kind of storylines, names that we're going to watch for. Let's start with breakout candidate. So this is obviously a little subjective as to what you consider a breakout. A few of these are subjective. I guess I'll start. The name that jumped out to me right away when we were doing this, and I hope I don't steal yours, was R. Mason Thomas, defensive end.
Dang it.
I knew.
Congrats.
Immediately. He was the most obvious name for this. As a breakout candidate. He just feels like a guy, if he remains healthy, and that's the question mark with him, really, is remaining healthy. He's going to put up big numbers. He's going to probably start opposite of Ethan Downs, I would imagine. And they'll rotate. There's a lot of guys. We just did the position preview for defensive ends. There's a lot of guys with Caden Woolard and PJ, and Trace Ford is still there, and the freshmen. But you got to figure R. Mason's going to get his snaps, and he is just ready to explode at any moment. So I would lean him as probably the number one breakout candidate. And you can even, if you want to just roll with R. Mason, that's fine. If you have another name, though, that's also fine.
I don't know if we talked about it enough, but what I was going to say, first of all, congrats on the first overall pick. You definitely capitalized on the opportunity. But what I was going to say is, I don't know that I get to talk enough about kind of my man crush for R. Mason Thomas.
Yeah.
I just think the world of him. And I think you and I were at one of OU's summer camps together covering the recruiting side. And R. Mason was one of the camp counselors, for lack of a better term. I think we just turned to each other and we're like, man, he looks like he's ready to go. And so I was a huge fan of his when Oklahoma kind of swept in there late and snuck him away in that cycle. And I feel like there are a lot of people in talking to sources that they think R. Mason Thomas has always had breakout candidate stuff. It's just about him having the opportunity to go and do so. And it sounds like he's going to have every chance to go be the player I think we all think he can be. So I had a couple other names on my list. And folks, why I love this draft type of format, and I think a lot of our listeners do like it as well, is I have to react live. There are two players, really three players, that I want to name here, Josh. So I'll rattle off real quickly the two that I'm thinking about, but then my selection at the end, and you can talk about any of these guys if you want to kind of round it out, or maybe even give an honorable mention. I'm looking at Robert Spears-Jennings. I'm looking at Peyton Bowen. I'm looking at my guy, speaking of man crushes, I think people know, Kip Lewis, I think is going to be
I'm with you.
a capital D dog this season, now being above the 220-pound threshold. But the guy I'm going to take is someone who, in my opinion, and I think, the reporting that you and I have had on fall camp, I think you could echo the sentiment. I think when you're talking breakout candidates, if R. Mason Thomas is the guy on defense, Bauer Sharp's the guy on offense for me.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of folks at Oklahoma right now and outside the program. I've had folks here in Texas in the high school level who get to go see Oklahoma in practices talk about, man, what do you know about Bauer Sharp? And I shared this nugget too on the show. When I went to the personnel symposium, we got to talk to a lot of Power 4 personnel coordinators and DPP guys. I couldn't tell you the number of times I was asked about Bauer Sharp specifically. In my opinion, we know what Oklahoma needed at the tight end spot. They went and got two dudes who, as someone who covered Seth Luttrell when he was in North Texas, I know he's someone who wants to throw some 12 personnel out there. He wants to get his tight ends the ball, but he also specifically kind of likes different role players at those tight end positions. One guy who's more the 2-point H-back, traditional blocker type, and I think that's your Jake Roberts.
Yeah.
But breakout candidates usually in the general public are getting the ball. Bauer Sharp, I think, is going to get the ball. And what he does with it could be pretty special from everything we've been told. So I'm going to take Bauer Sharp, and I feel really good about it because I think arguably this might be the name on that offensive side of the ball that people are talking about the most as someone who they're not only very, I don't want to say surprised, but overly pleased with and excited to see what he can do this season.
With you completely. The only other one I can maybe would throw in for me would be, and I just talked about it the other day, but I've been a huge Lewis Carter fan from the moment I first saw that Tampa Catholic tape. Him and Samuel Masigo both. If they get some run, and I think they will, they got guys that they're obviously have Danny and like you said, Kip Lewis is prepared for a huge year. You have those other year 3 guys with Kobe McKenzie and Jaron Canick, but if Samuel Masigo and Lewis Carter get their opportunity, and I think they very well might, Samuel Masigo playing some cheetah, that they feel like they could very well make the most of it. Those guys are both freaks. Those are big ones for me. I'll let you start for the next one.
So
go for it.
Next up, snake draft style here. I'm sticking with the next pick, and our upcoming topic is impact freshmen for Oklahoma coming out of fall camp. And I think there's some intriguing ways you could go about this. But I'm going to take the layup here because you went defense. You took the layup pick, R. Mason Thomas. I'm going to kind of do something similar and pick Jaden Jackson.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way. Is Jaden Jackson starting for Oklahoma in week 1 at defensive tackle, nose tackle?
Yeah. He's in the mix.
Embrace debate. He has not only come in, and when he enrolled early and got on campus, and I mean, we started hearing about him. What you and I, Josh, started hearing about him from sources when he was there for the bowl practices. Like they were like, this dude's different. He carried that momentum from bowl practices into spring ball through summer workouts, and now here we are today and through fall camp. How often are we talking about a freshman being someone not only making plays and showing flashes of dominance, but being someone who can show that consistently at the defensive tackle spot, right? Like it's hard for freshmen at some of those trench positions to come in and go up against those big dudes that have been in college weight programs and have been coached up by college coaches for 2, 3, 4 years. Jaden Jackson's not only doing that right now, he's doing that on a day-to-day basis and putting this coaching staff in a position where they have to seriously consider whether or not he's worthy of rolling out there onto the field snap one on the defensive side of the ball. I think he is the easy pick for impact freshmen, and I think he's shown the case to be that ever since he got to Norman.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I do think whenever the first depth chart drops, which will probably be sometime in the next few days, I have to think it'll be Dejon Terry and Dom Williams as your two guys. But
yep.
Jaden Jackson, by everything I've been told, and the same for you, I'm certain, based off that pick, he's pushing. He's pushing for that, and he's right in that mix. I do think it'll probably be Dejon Terry, but it's close.
It's a conversation, which is crazy.
Yeah. I'll probably go with the low-hanging fruit and just his buddy, but I'll go with David Stone. Similar reasoning. Everything has been coming up rosy for David Stone so far, and he's the guy that brought in. We talked about it whenever they got him committed, and he was a huge deal, obviously, similar to what we just had with Michael Fasusi, and that there was so much build up to that decision. And we talked about at the time, could he have an impact right away? And we agreed. Yeah, he definitely could and probably will. And so here we are. And I have to think that, if all goes to plan and he has the development that he has hoped to have over this last month and over the course of this freshman season, he's going to see the field. He's going to play. So David Stone will be a big one for me. As far as like some honorable mentions, there's one obvious honorable mention I want to make sure I get in Michael Boganowski. Would be a big one. I know you're a big fan of him. Those safety room, you have the three big names with Billy Bowman, Peyton Bowen, Robert Spears-Jennings. It's kind of up for grabs after that. And, Michael Boganowski is just a name that everyone you talk to, whether it's a player, someone around the team, Brent Venables even, his name comes up quick every time. I remember Robert Spears-Jennings was asked about him, and he just kind of smiled and was like, yeah, he's a thumper. He will mess you up. We all remember the spring game. There were so many jokes about he's the only one who doesn't know this is a scrimmage. He's just lighting people up everywhere. Michael Boganowski, I have a feeling is going to have a role in some capacity on this team as well. It's hard to do as a true freshman at Oklahoma, but I do think that that's very realistic. Was there any other ones for you that have a potential?
Yeah, my real quick honorable mentions. First of all, Boganowski is a great one.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day. How good do you feel if you're that Oklahoma staff that a lot of folks were recruiting him as a linebacker and you said, no. We're going to recruit you as a safety. And he's coming there and is thumping from the back end. I mean, that's got to feel really good to trust your eval. He's paid off. My quick honorable mentions, we know my fandom of Reggie Powers. I think he has a chance to find some time in the rotation at Cheetah or whatever. So many safeties, dude. It's just so many safeties. And then the last one I want to throw out there, my honorable mention. I'll tell you what, Josh, I don't know if you've heard the same from talking to folks, but Eli Bowen.
Yes, it's a good one.
Eli Bowen. I was a huge fan of his in high school. And I remember a lot of folks asking me, is Eli going to be able to make the impact that Peyton can bring to the table because of being relatively undersized? Eli Bowen is out there making plays from what we've heard coming out of fall camp. So that would be my other quick honorable mention. I
do think, too, we'll throw it in there. I do think Taylor Tatum has got a chance as well. I do think that it'll probably be the Sawchuk and Barnes show with some Caleb Hicks mixed in there. But Taylor Tatum is a freak of nature, so he's worth mentioning. Next up, what is it? Team MVP, I believe.
Yep. You have the T-box, sir.
I'm in the T-box. There's a very obvious one here. I guess I'll go ahead and take it. Danny Stutzman. That's the most obvious pick. I talk about this a few times. We just did the linebacker position preview of the day. Danny Stutzman, in my opinion, is Oklahoma's best player on the current team. But beyond that, he's the face of the program. He's the leader of the team. You remember the Texas game last year? We all do. The pregame speech. he makes it all go. He kind of is OU football right now in 2024. It was a huge deal to get him back whenever he originally thought he might go pro, changed his mind. And that's huge, obviously. He's on everything Oklahoma does. He's at the forefront of it. And that's both because of what he is on the field as well as his personality and his leadership, all that. Danny Stutzman is massively important. And he's at a position that's probably the deepest and maybe best on the team. And I still feel like he's that because he's just so vital and he's so good to what Oklahoma's trying to do. So Danny Stutzman for me is team MVP. He's an instrumental part of this team and roster this year. And
he's had a really good fall camp. We don't talk about it enough just because,
it's a given. Yeah, right.
What are we going to say? Oh, he's doing really good.
Really kept in my eye is this Stutzman kid. Yeah.
Don't sleep on him. But okay, so I'm trying to feed off of your picks and sort of uphold the idea of like, if you go defense and an easy one, I got to go offense to a degree, for the sake of the show and for the people out there. Because I feel like an honorable mention off the top, Billy Bowman.
Yep.
Danny Stutzman's right there. Billy Bowman's right there. Right?
Did you see the Make Defense Great Again shirts and hats?
The Stutzman Bowman 24, I believe, is the I think that's for sale now as well. I believe they went live for that shop. So that's a thing. But again, it speaks to what these two mean to the program.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you're taking the easy name, and I want to kind of go off the beaten path, make sure I'm touching on the offensive side of the ball, Deion Burks is going to be one of the faces of this team.
Yeah.
I feel like, and this is what, for me, I know I talked about this when they got him out of the portal. For me, Deion Burks was one of, if not the top transfer wide receiver available in the portal at the time for good reason. Now, he comes into that Oklahoma receiver room, and you're like, this is an embarrassment of riches. How are they even going to make this work? Why I make this pick.
Yeah.
I go back to so often with some of these unknowns on the offensive side of the ball, my time covering North Texas when Seth Luttrell was there. And when Seth was at UNT, they had a player by the name of Jalen Darden. Now, I'm not saying that Deion Burks and Jalen Darden are the same player. Why I bring this up, Jalen Darden was kind of like this super athletic, twitchy, fun slot receiver, not the biggest guy in the world. But what Seth Luttrell and his offensive staff did a great job of was, even when everyone in the stadium knew they wanted to get the ball to Jalen Darden, they found a way to get him the ball. And Jalen Darden went from UNT and an unknown recruit to the NFL. I think Deion Burks is an NFL player right now. And if Seth Luttrell knows how to get a guy like that the ball, no matter what the situation calls for, this guy's going to be one of the faces of the offense. And I think from what we've heard, kind of going back to what are we going to say? Stutzman's having a good fall camp. Deion Burks is Deion Burks. So I think he's arguably your leading receiver this year. And from a yardage perspective or a receptions perspective. And I think this is the guy that when OU needs a big play, they got to move the chains and they got to find a way to get their best player the ball.
Yeah.
I think it's Deion Burks for you in 2024.
No, that's a great pick. And like you just said, very similarly to what we were kind of joking about with Stutzman. Not that Deion Burks has, hasn't played a game at Oklahoma yet, but he was so good in the spring. And he was so good in the spring game that this fall, it was, kind of the same thing, a little bit of a given, but he's had a great camp too. He's, the receiver room has been, guys have been in and out. Obviously, Jaden Gibson got hurt. Nick Anderson, Jalil Farouk have been kind of in and out. Deion Burks has been there the whole way and lighting it up the whole way from what I've been told. And so, huge year is coming up for him. Him and Jackson Arnold had kind of that, kind of similar, reminds me a lot of just last year, Dylan Gabriel and Angelo Anthony. I just felt like there was that immediate, like, these guys just go together on the football field. I feel like Arnold and Burks is very similar. And we saw how that played out at the beginning of last year before Angelo got hurt. It was just, the chemistry was just there immediately. It feels like it's very similar for Arnold and Burks. So that's a great pick. Great pick, yeah. And Arnold certainly, I guess, deserves an honorable mention as well, as just quarterback kind of always falls under the umbrella of just really.
I was about to say, I guess that would be your other honorable mention before I move to the next one. So I also feel like he does fall under, to a degree, the next topic, which
for sure
most to prove at Oklahoma in 2024 from
definitely
a perspective. And I think Arnold is someone who many people will point to right away. I'm not going to go there though, Josh. I'm going to go Michael Tarquin here. I think this is huge because
I agree.
Let me put it this way. When we did a lot of reporting on the Michael Tarquin transfer portal process, and funny enough, he didn't even have an announcement. I just reported that he had entered the student database and he was on campus. This Michael Tarquin situation is flying under the radar, and it has from the start.
Mm-hmm.
But the context here for me is, Josh, like I've always been, and maybe it's not fair, but like just my opinion, I've always been relatively skeptical of taking a guy like Tarquin who, whether it was at Florida or at USC, it has yet to come together for a guy, at least from what we've seen to this point, for someone who's now going to be your left tackle at Oklahoma. And when I heard that this was someone who was potentially going to take over the left tackle side, maybe I didn't buy in all the way just because I didn't know whether or not they were trying to deal with some of the bumps and bruises that we've discussed, and they're trying to get Jacob Sexton prepared to play some guard. But it very much sounds like this is someone who's going to start for Oklahoma if all things are even. And so, man, you go into the SEC and Michael Tarquin is your left tackle. I think this is the player that jumps out to me as someone who has a ton to prove, because following his last few stops, now considering where he is, the program he's at, and where this program is going, this guy's going to determine a lot of Oklahoma's success in 2024. So I can't wait to see what he brings to the table.
No, it's a great pick. And there's a few guys on the offensive line that you could probably make an argument for this, because there's a few guys that they really need to step up and have their best years. I'm going to stick on offense. I'm not going to flip, because the one that jumped out to me on offense, Javonte Barnes is a big one for me. I've been talking about Javonte a lot over the course of the offseason, and I'll do it again. Last year was just a bizarre year for him. It was a lost year for him. He was hurt, couldn't get on the field. And, that freshman season, he was so good as Eric Gray's second option and had the great Cheez-It Bowl with Gavin Sawchuk. And it was like, these guys are going to form this duo. It's going to be awesome. And it didn't happen last year. Gavin was able to salvage his year, finished really strong. And now, the spring comes and the spring game happens. He doesn't get a carry. And we're all kind of like, is this relationship over? Is it done? He stuck it out. He's still here. He's had a monster camp. He's a guy whose name comes up every time I talk to anyone around the team as far as post scrimmage or whatever. He's just been making play after play after play. Gavin Sawchuk's, I think, going to be your guy. He's going to get plenty of touches. But the Javonte Barnes, kind of comeback resurgence season is upon us. I really think he's going to have a massive bounce back here. He's going to have that edge, because he was kind of forgotten about for a lot of people. And he's going to remind people, I think, that, I was really, really good 2 years ago. And I'm a potentially next level caliber running back. And so I think it's a huge prove it year for Javonte Barnes. And I think he's going to do it as well. Honorable mentions for this. There's a lot. One that jumps out to me on the defensive side, I would probably say a couple of linebackers, Cody McKenzie and Jaren Kanak, both, I feel like, have got a lot to prove. They're in year 3. Kip Lewis has risen to borderline star status, or at least rising star status. We talked about those year 2 guys, Lewis Carter, Samuel Wasigo, that are breathing down their necks. It's a huge year for both those guys, I feel like. Make or breaks maybe a little strong, but, Jaren Kanak is a guy who started last year, and, his play was a little up and down. He's kind of fading back a little. Cody McKenzie hasn't had a ton of run, but it's a guy that I still really like. Mm-hmm. Both those guys, I think, are in major, this is a huge year for them category. I put both of those as honorable mentions for me. What about for you?
Yeah, I think some folks will bring up PJ here, but I don't know how you feel about it. I personally don't think he has a ton to prove this season because I don't think he has to be the guy. So
yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
I mean, that defensive end room right now is loaded. Miguel Chavis has done a great job. So I think PJ doesn't have to be the premier pass rusher considering the number of names that are in that room. You mentioned the defense. Dominic Williams, to a degree.
Yeah, there's a lot of expectations there. I think that's a good one.
That's a microscope being put on you after the portal process and everything that was made out to be as far as your talent level and everything. I think he's going to be really darn good. I'm just saying general perspective. I think a lot of fans are going to be tuning in.
Yeah, expecting a lot.
Yeah, other fan bases are going to be watching Dominic Williams every given Saturday and basically trying to say whether or not he was worth all that pursuit. And I think he has a real opportunity to deliver because I think I've talked about it briefly. I just feel like this system fits him a lot better relative to his frame and skill set. So I think Dominic Williams kind of comes to mind to me because of what he meant to Oklahoma and what that portal process looked like. I mean, it was arguably one of the most talked about portal recruitments in the window. And so I look at him as someone with maybe some things to prove.
No, that's a good one, and I agree. I think he's gonna be good. I'm excited to watch him play. Here next week, but and not for nothing, but no disrespect to our good buddies in Fort Worth, but a little more pressure, spotlight, fan attention, media attention at Oklahoma. So that's a big step up for him in the SEC now too, as well, obviously. So I'm with you. That's a good one. All right, I think that's it. That was fun. I mean, good way to kind of go through some last kind of camp intel / storylines for the upcoming season. We're moving into game week. Pretty crazy. High school games are back next week as well, so you're going to be really busy with that. I as well, and then obviously the OU openers next Friday. It's pretty wild. It is go time. We got week 0 this weekend, so enjoy.
Man, I can't overstate it. I needed football back in my life. I know others are in the same boat, but it feels so good to know that we're kicking the ball off almost nationwide, basically, coming up as early as this weekend. So week 1 is going to be here before you know it. And thank the Lord we get a little week 0 flavor too. Because I am way more bought into Florida State, Georgia Tech, and SMU's game against Nevada really should be at this time.
Yeah. No, I'm stoked. I'm going out to a scrimmage over at Carl Albert tonight, and just the first hit or whatever is gonna just feel good. We've been out of practice and stuff, but it'll be different. All right, I think that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to subscribe to Sooners Illustrated. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Again, next week the show will be on Tuesday with Tom Jays and myself for final season predictions. We'll lock in the record and all that stuff, how we think this year's going to go. We'll do that on Tuesday. The Brent Venables press will be on Monday. So keep an eye out for the YouTube channel for that, along with player interviews in the evening on Monday. And then we'll get you all ready for the first game next Friday. Pretty wild. We're excited. Season 2 for Sooners Illustrated. That's it for now. We'll see you back here next week. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you guys next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.